fantastic to have you here, Nick. Thanks for joining us. So I'm really looking forward to today to really actually, just have a chance to talk to you about your personal experiences in Web3 and what Ajuna's trying to do and how that works together with what Integritee is doing and how that partnership really works. But today I really want to focus on, the personal aspect. So, a bit of background on Ajuna, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong, right? Because I do my best to know, what it is that you guys are doing. But the really cool thing, as far as I understand, from what Ajuna is doing, is actually building a platform that allows developers to build games with, blockchain assets, and also uses, you're going to have to explain that, uses engines like Unity and Unreal to allow developers to easily build those games. Am I on the mark there, or?
Yeah, thank you for having me here, and it's fun to sort of get the opportunity to discuss a bit together. For us, Ajuna is a journey that started, I would say, about 3 or 4 years ago for sort of the core team. That's Cedric, Andre, and a bit later on myself. We always wanted to build a game, and as a lot of teams that sort of discovered blockchain technology, our first thing that we did is just trying to explore the technology and see what from the infrastructure that there works or not. So fairly quickly what we understood is that as a technology, it's still at its sort of infancy, and in terms of gaming, where there's two aspects that are really important. One is latency, so being able to, if you have a big latency, it means that the fluidity of the game or the user experience is quite compromised. And the other thing that's also really important is to be able to have privacy whenever you're, especially when you're going into more competitive things. And I think that's where, for us as an initial step, being able to sort of discover Substrate and later on Polkadot, it solved a lot of these problems. But for us always, the goal was, as I said, sort of that user experience and privacy. And I think that's where, in particular, at least the relationship between Ajuna and Integritee sort of produces its more value, because for us being able to use those trusted execution environments, it allows for, on the one hand, to be able to maintain that user experience, to be fluid and competitive to the traditional market, but also at the same time, it allows us to do that in sort of a secure way. Yeah, I think for us the advantage, or sort of, I would say the main difference that we have as a solution for gaming compared to most other offerings out there, is that we take the game engine, or as you sort of mentioned before, whether you're working on Unreal Engine or Unity, and we can deploy it in a completely decentralized fashion. So player governance is something true, let's say, on Ajuna.
Okay, yeah, no, fantastic to get your insight into, what it is that Ajuna does from your perspective. But I have to say, I'm very, very curious, how did you get into, for me, blockchain and gaming is a very unique space. And it's not always, for me, a space that has made sense. I've enjoyed gaming myself, and I've seen what is possible on the blockchain. But how did you get into this specific, very unique area?
So my beginning, let's say, of the journey into the blockchain and gaming space, I would say it started back in 2007, 2008. Then I was working in private equity and private banking. So as the result of the collapse, I saw sort of the beginning of Bitcoin, which was a reaction to what was going on back then. So it had to do a lot with decentralizing power. Sort of that was the main theme, I would say, around Bitcoin. Now, later on, as sort of technologies evolved and we started understanding the concept of smart contracts and later on of digital assets and all of these things, gaming started becoming a very interesting concept. So for me, when I moved to Switzerland, which is about a decade ago now, that's where my entrepreneurial journey started. I would say now in traditional startups, because now if you're working in Web3, I guess startups are traditional. That's where I started, and it was in fitness, but I was always using, let's say, gamification concepts in order sort of to try and get user interactions and things like that. A few years ago, I deep dived, let's say, into the blockchain and gaming space, because it was a sort of, we were creating a blockchain which was specific, again, sort of for games. So not very different in terms of the industry that we're in with Ajuna right now, but sort of a completely different play back then. And for me, what blockchain represents for gaming goes around two issues. One, first of all, it's a background technology. So in terms of gamers, they should not care about what the technology is. They should just sort of care about the experience. So blockchain is the background technology here. What's the really fascinating thing for me is because of the ability to create your own economy and regulate your own economy. And as a result, in that economy, you don't only have this central authority called the publisher, but you also have all of these participants who can be gamers. You open up sort of the possibilities for game developers and game designers to come up with completely new sort of concepts. A good example is there's this movie called Ready Player One.
Oh yes.
Where it's essentially a mix-up of all of these different franchises living in an online world, where there's in-game items which are clearly NFTs, but in gaming sort of world that does not exist. But these are the types of experiences I think that we can see down the line. It has nothing to do with sort of tokens per se or cryptocurrencies or play to earn. All of these are just mechanisms. It's about empowering developers to sort of create a new experience. So Tristan, maybe you can tell me a bit also about yourself and how you got involved sort of in the blockchain space. Was that something that you've been looking to get into for a few years, or is it something like, let's say, you stumbled upon, like probably it was in my case?
Well, I mean, I think that probably, most people working in the blockchain space that we interact with stumbled across it, right? I think most people who say that they didn't are lying through their teeth. But I mean, look, for me, it wasn't really, integrity. The blockchain aspect was a secondary aspect for me. So I came from working in government and then in banking, financial institutions, fintechs, and very much saw on the inside how private data was treated, and also how important and how restrictive, especially in Europe, GDPR legislation is, and how much that restricts innovation. I mean, it's a necessary restriction. People's private data has to be protected, and we need to take those extra steps because more and more data is at risk, and people aren't aware of just how much their data is at risk. But at the same time, it also stifles innovation. It stifles companies being able to collaborate on data and have meaningful outcomes, analysis, and that brings whole industries forward. I actually, then moved into, working in confidential computing in a startup and really looking at trusted execution environments and their ability versus other alternatives like homomorphic encryption to secure data in runtime, which is when data is at its most weak. And then that is how I came into Integritee. So blockchain in that sense was not the primary way that I started with Integritee. And from a personal perspective, it was fantastic because from the very beginning, I remember, still being at university and mining my first Bitcoins. Unfortunately, not keeping enough of them. From the very beginning, having been very much involved and interested in studying finance and seeing that evolve as I was going through university at the time. So, I see the huge potential of leveraging this hardware-based technology, which is extremely powerful, leveraging that on the blockchain for huge variety of use cases.
So for us, obviously, this partnership for Ajuna and generally for gaming trusted execution environments, as I said, for us, it sort of captures two things at the same time: being able to reduce sort of that latency and create close to at least real-time interaction. So in our case, we can bring that latency down to about 300 milliseconds while maintaining privacy. So I think that for the gaming industry in general, and specifically for us, that's sort of what the trusted execution environments provide for us. What other sectors are sort of you at Integritee looking at, or where sort of these trusted execution environments can bring, let's say, a lot of value as they do in gaming?
It's very difficult to outline exactly each sector where I think that this could have a value add, because to me that is also like asking in which sector does data privacy play a key role. So I think that there are potential use cases nearly across every industry. I mean, looking just purely at the blockchain side of things, I think there are big use cases when it comes to decentralized applications and decentralized exchanges. But I mean, there's huge opportunities with secure, trustless oracles as well. I mean, yeah, we see that the scope, of course, of companies that we're working with and partners that we're working with really cover a broad range of industries. But I mean, I have to say that working with Ajuna is by far probably the most interesting in terms of working with, I mean, gaming is just a lot more fun. And I think a lot of people are probably very envious of you being able to work, in the blockchain space and the gaming space. So, I mean, do you get the chance to, game during the day at all?
Well,
like, I mean, as part of your job or?
As part of my job description. So I'll say yes. No, we do get the opportunity. So what I can share is that for me, this is the first time that I've been involved in a team that has both really competent technical people and really creative people as part of the team. And having those things together, work within a team, so both of that creative force and technical force is really a great environment to work. So we try to keep things playful and happy. We try to actually play video games together as a team because at the end of the day, that's the industry that we're going in. We're passionate about it, and yeah, it's a good way also to interact sort of eventually with your audience. But I think, I mean, one of the issues that we are constantly, I would say, struggling with and trying to find a good balance is that we understand as gamers that, as I mentioned earlier, that technology is always in the background. No gamer gets interested in a game because it's built on Amazon Web Services or it's using XYZ code, or now that we're talking with blockchain, whether it's on this or the other blockchain. All they care about is sort of the gaming experience. So finding that right combination for us to be able to communicate what it is that we provide, but at the same time not alienating them with technical jargon is sort of something that's constantly in our head. Yeah.
But I mean, you really have two target audiences as well, because I mean, on the one hand, what you're doing on the blockchain is incredibly interesting for people who are blockchain enthusiasts, of course, because it is something very new, very fresh, and very interesting. And it's also a lot more tangible to most people. I think for a lot of people, blockchain can be very abstract. A lot of different use cases are very abstract when you're talking about, when people talk about decentralized applications. When I start talking about anything related to blockchain, my wife and my family zone me out completely, and here he goes again. But once you relate it to something tangible and relatable that people understand, like gaming, it's quite interesting. So I think you've got your blockchain enthusiasts who really like to see this type of development happening, because it shows more and more that there is mainstream adoption of blockchain technology. And on the other hand, like you said, you've got your gamers who are not interested at all. And do you think that you will start seeing gamers starting to become, because of the game, starting to become interested in blockchain, and vice versa, crypto or blockchain enthusiasts who discover a passion for gaming?
So first of all, that is the reality that we actually face on a daily basis. And I think when you look at the blockchain space, that is a lot easier, because generally blockchain enthusiasts are looking for any use case that can lead to let's say a form of mass adoption, whether that's gaming or any other application. They always have sort of a positive mindset to see what you're doing. Obviously, since it's around gaming, which is generally quite a retail friendly application, it makes our life quite, I would say, easy, and you can have really good conversations and explain what it is that you're sort of adding to this industry. Now, for gamers, I would say gamers will always be gamers. Companies, including us, will consistently fail to deliver the message, because usually gamers want to sort of just see it, play it, and experience it. You can talk a lot of jargon, it won't matter. So I think gamers will continue being gamers, and until we reach that point in the blockchain space that we can create games that are competitive to the traditional market and really sort of can attract an audience, there's going to be this sort of divide between the two communities. So focus is on games as I think it should. Yeah.
Okay. And how far away do you think that is then? I mean.
Yeah, I think it's quite far away in the sense that just last year we saw the NFT market go into this sort of multi-billion-dollar industry. But when you sort of take a step back and look at it from a gamer's perspective, these NFTs represent in-game assets.
Yes.
And in-game assets have their value that comes from their functionality and their usage inside the game. So when we see NFTs right now from the gamer's perspective, it just doesn't make sense what we're looking at. So I would say the next 2 to 3 years is probably a transition phase that you take game structures and designs which exist in let's say Web 2, and you try to add Web 3 components.
Yes.
So it's going to look a bit like, a Frankenstein type of sort of experience for a little while until I think game studios understand not the technical side of the blockchain, but more the opportunities around game design and owning your own economy, where we'll see new experiences or sort of experiences that we had in the past being revived quite a lot. Yeah.
I mean, it's really fascinating for me as well. And I mean, the one thing I am curious about is that, I mean, Ajuna is in essence, an infrastructure. It's a platform to enable games to be built, right? Are you planning to build your own games in addition to that? So, I mean, it's one thing to be a platform to facilitate it, but are you also looking to, go directly down, building and releasing your own games as a company?
I'm not sure what sort of the future holds exactly. Our itch is always that we want to make a game, and I think that's a good itch to have because that's where we come from. But everything started with us with a game. We never started Ajuna thinking I want to make a layer 2 solution or a technical sort of such a technical product. So it came from the pain of when we were trying to build our own game, .mog. Simply we couldn't find an infrastructure that could do what needed to be done, and so we built the infrastructure. So for now, .mog, which is the game that started everything, we are going to release it. We have partnered with a traditional studio from Canada, Gamepill, who have close to 15-20 years of experience in making games with big companies like Ubisoft and Disney. And so we're going to release that game as, let's say, our flagship game, and it's there not only to be able to show sort of gamers what type of experiences can be created on the blockchain, but it's a really good way to actually show developers and studios what can be done, because as I said, saying sometimes will take you up until one point, but showing sort of the industry what is possible is things like that. And for the future, I think our one side would always tell us, yes, I want to make a game. That sounds like a lot of fun to do, but for us, our success comes from us being the infrastructure. So if Amazon Web Services is the infrastructure, let's say for Web 2 gaming, that's where we would like to take Ajuna for sort of Web 3.
I mean, absolutely fantastic. I mean, no, I really love the concept, but I mean, I'm also quite interested about learning about you in the sense that, do you have to be a hardcore gamer to work at Ajuna? I mean, is your team made up of hardcore gamers, would you say?
So I wouldn't say that our whole team is necessarily hardcore gamers, but we're all definitely into gaming. What's interesting about the team is that sort of we are all interested in different genres of the game. Me, myself, I've always played more sort of first-person shooter type of games and competitive. Other people are with turn-based games like Hearthstone and things like that. So we get on each other's case quite a lot about what's gaming or what's not gaming, whether I'm playing with a control or a mouse and keyboard. But gaming is sort of a common thread that holds the whole team together, and we're taking advantage of it as much as we can. I mean, I can't remember the last time that my boss, so in this case Cedric, once the day was done, we asked him, okay, shall we play a bit of Call of Duty? And I was like, yeah, okay, I'm in the right company for sure.
Yes. I mean, I think it's probably a lot of people's dream to be able to, be playing a game, and if your wife or your girlfriend says, can you please stop playing? No, sorry, I'm not playing, I'm working. Yeah. I think that is one of those dreams, unattainable dreams, which you seem to have attained. So I'm quite jealous in that.
I will share a story how this actually, which I thought, how great, I can tell my wife and my kids, that is working, with a controller, but it has backfired quite a lot because now my son, who's 10 years old, and he's, if he could play on his Nintendo all day, he would. Now he has an excuse, like, why can't I play? And he's sort of like with fancy big, headphones talking about games. So it has its plus and its minuses, I guess, at home. But yeah, for me, it's been a really, really, really great experience. But how about yourself? I mean, do you remember as a kid playing sort of video games, or what was always sort of your go-to game, and how has sort of that evolved over the years?
Well, I mean, I don't think my taste in games has evolved, and I think a lot of people probably have a genre that they love and stick with. Generally speaking, I do branch out, but I'm definitely like a hardcore like strategy games. I played Age of Empires for hours and hours, LAN parties, cables going everywhere, Warcraft, and I mean, I was so happy when Age of Empires came out again after 10 years last year, and so yeah, I'm very much strategy gamer, but I do enjoy I branch out playing Assassin's Creed on the console, right? So I mean, and Skyrim, I think I've lost probably a couple of years of my life to that game as well. So I would love to do it more, of course, but so maybe you can let me know when there's a job opening at Ajuna, and we can talk further.
That's I mean, at least we can organize something, maybe some team matchups or something like that. Integritee and Ajuna, some games would be definitely something we can do.
I think that's going to be a very one-sided experience from the sound of it. But you might be surprised, depending on what we play. I just wanted to ask you another, like more serious question as well. So I mean, what you plan to do at Ajuna is really to decentralize the ownership and the control of in-game assets. And I've seen you place emphasis on that before. Is that something that's really important to you personally?
Well, I mean, for me, having played quite a few different games as I was growing up, always the idea of grinding or spending hours in order to achieve, let's say, unlocking a legendary sword or a weapon or something like that meant a lot to me. I never felt a sense of ownership because that's the way that these things were designed. Or actually, I felt a sense of ownership, but I never felt a sense that I would ever want to trade it for something else. Now what's happening with the introduction of NFTs and sort of trying to figure out how they can become part of gaming is that it adds a lot of different elements to it. Now these elements have been around for years. I mean, World of Warcraft, as you mentioned, it did have a play to earn side of it. It was a black market, but it still happened. So for us, I think the ownership of digital assets is one thing that is important, but for that to make to have any real value, unless the game engine is governed and controlled by the community, then again, sort of that ownership is very thin. Because even if you have, let's say, an NFT layer, if your engine is always controlled by one entity and they just pull down pull the plug, then again your NFT is worthless. So we like the idea of being able to give that opportunity to game developers to figure out ways, and they will need to figure out ways how it sort of makes sense, of having a game engine fully decentralized and allowing for the community to have a say of how the game evolves, whether that's for updates or things like that. So yeah, we think it's really important to be able sort of to achieve that in the future.
Okay, no, I mean, that's really interesting. And I'm also, I mean, this is my last question really, but I'm curious to understand, there's a lot of genres of games which have, started losing their appeal and, their mass adoption. Do you think, do you see any of these, older genres of games that are not really popular anymore actually seeing a resurgence in popularity as a result of, the blockchain era?
I think that's a really interesting question, and on the one side, I'm happy I don't know the answer, because I think gaming in the past, when there's new technologies being introduced, whether that's, let's say, the internet or mobile phones later on, they tend to take a few years to figure out what's new, what new experiences they can then create. So that's the unknown factor, which is the interesting part. Now I think that games like MMORPGs can have quite a resurgence right now. Not that they died off really at any time, but maybe sort of are not as popular, simply because I think that type of game gives a lot of opportunities from a token economy or creating a new type of economy. Then I think that turn-based games like Hearthstone and things like that obviously become really interesting on the blockchain because of again, sort of that ownership part of it. And the type of games that I play more, so like first-person shooters or real-time games, I think we have a bit of time there. So because on the one hand, there's a technology limitation. As I said, within even the trusted execution environments, we achieve 300 milliseconds. For a real-time game, you need under 50 or 40. So we're not there yet. Already, there's studios that are planning around these types of games, and so I expect in the next 3 to 5 years that we start seeing sort of these genres popping up even in the blockchain. So quite exciting times.
It really is really exciting times at the moment. Yep.
So now we're going to go ahead and answer a few of the questions that were posted on Twitter. So I'll go ahead with the first one. Currently, the number of people playing games in the traditional game market is very large. So what strategy does Ajuna Network have to attract players from traditional games to playing blockchain games? Well, I don't think that this is necessarily up to Ajuna itself. It's more of the blockchain ecosystem managing to make some really great games. At the end of the day, you will see that even when big publishers or hardware producers like Sony and Microsoft, when they create their new consoles, what attracts gamers is always great games. So with Ajuna, what we're trying to do is just enable developers by giving them the right sort of tool sets to be able to create great games. If you create great games, then you're going to get, I would say, the gamers to the blockchain space. How long will it take for the player experience on blockchain games to be on par with today's traditional games? Well, yeah, that's a good question, and it really depends on the genre of the game. So, for example, on Ajuna, where we achieve a latency of about 300 milliseconds, so that would equate to about 3 actions per second in a game. If you would take a turn-based game like Hearthstone, that would play absolutely perfectly on the blockchain. What that means is that for a gamer, he would not be able to tell the difference between the game being on, let's say, a traditional server or being on the blockchain. Now, if you take a genre of game that requires real-time interactions, so first-person shooters, multiplayer games, World of Warcraft, these types of games right now would not be able to run on the blockchain in a completely decentralized fashion. So the technology needs to make a few evolutionary steps until we get there, or until that time comes, you're going to have hybrid solutions. So part of the game being run on centralized service, and part of the game, like the NFT, could be, so there can be an NFT layer on the blockchain. What's your outlook on the future of gaming in blockchain space? How can Integritee and Ajuna help in this case? So yeah, I think Integritee and Ajuna are going to play a critical role in this space, because the future promise of blockchain really is the decentralized aspect of gaming. And what that means essentially is both the developers and the community have the opportunity to decide how this game is being created, how this game evolves, how this game gets updated. So we see a future where sort of the relationship between studios and the community is a lot closer, both in their responsibilities, but also on sort of the profit sharing part of it.